Darling, we've had one hell of a time, but the question on everybody's mind, where is the power? We've had one hell of a time, but the question on everybody's mind.
Matthew Rosenberg, I have a question for you, and it is: do ideas bleed?
That's a wow. You know, bleed. People don't know this because this podcast just started. Bleed has multiple meanings, and it has a meaning in both the human body or anybody with a liquid in it. I don't really know.
Let him finish. Let him
But
finish.
there's also a print meaning. So, like, you know, people who think our podcast has a stupid name, they probably don't realize that it's slightly less stupid than they think.
They don't know that it's layered.
Yeah, it's nuanced, guys. There's nuance.
Well, welcome back to the slightly less stupid Ideas Don't Bleed, featuring Matthew Rosenberg, as well as the two Supple Boiz here, Ethan S. Parker, and myself, Griffin Sheridan. But we're joined by two fantastic guests on this very special episode. Kelly Thompson is making her triumphant return from episodes 1 and 2, going for 3, maybe even 4. We'll see.
Is this your victory lap?
I'm just a permanent fixture now. Just accept it. That's what's happened.
Perfect. And this episode, we're also joined by Ed Brisson. Ed, fantastic having you, sir. Thank you for being here.
No, thanks a lot.
So much
that's all I
enthusiasm.
got.
Man.
That was sounded more upset to be here.
That was some real me and Ed hanging out live. And he was like, "Oh, hey,
You guys are getting the real stuff. I appreciate that.
We are taking it back all the way to the fall of 2018 for everybody this episode. How's that striking you, Matt? I saw
Can you immerse yourself in 2018?
I honestly, when you said it, I was like, "Is that the right year?" Like that's how much good insight you're going to get from me on this. Is that like I was like, "Is that the correct year?" I'm not sure, but it is. I think right.
It is November of 2018. Yes.
Yeah.
If you can think that far back, pre-pandemic days, you know, you guys were just doing a little X-Men book before the world collapsed.
That's correct.
Completely and utterly, I think is what I'm saying.
It feels even further than that away, though, because I believe the summit for this was in, April of that year, right? Something like that. March, maybe?
Yeah, we started early.
In the spring.
Yeah, it wasn't winter.
I feel like I actually might have missed my wife's birthday to be at the retreat. April.
Oh,
You know what? I do remember
it on Marvel.
something like that. I do remember something like that.
Yeah, a real dick move on Marvel's part, not mine.
Not mine.
You're wondering what book Ed had to miss his wife's birthday for. Of course, we're talking about Uncanny X-Men.
I didn't realize we hadn't said that yet.
Me either. Thank God, Griffin. We'd be lost already.
specifically, we're talking the 10 parts X-Men Disassembled that you three collaborated on.
Yes.
Looking back, how do you feel? What do you think?
Yeah, let's just get it started. Matt, we can start with you, your podcast. How do you feel about Uncanny X-Men 4 years on?
You know, my feeling, I just was doing the math. I was like, is that 4 years? That's how good I feel sharp today. How do I feel is, for me, growing up, Uncanny X-Men is my book. Like, that's my all-time favorite. That's my number one comic. You know, my whole life. That's it. So I feel incredibly proud to have written this book, you know, a whole large chunk of my favorite characters in comics. It's a nice, I was already writing X-Men stuff. All of us were, but to do Uncanny feels really heavy. And I feel good about it in that, like, people all the time come up to me at shows, at signings, and talk about how much they love the run. And that's a good feeling. But it's a weird book. It's a weird book and weird memories. I think that people, you know, when you make a comic at the end of the day, there's sort of two things you're trying to do, which is make something you're proud of and make something that the audience likes. And I feel like we accomplished both of those things to varying degrees. I feel like I'm very proud to have done the book, and there's a lot of stuff in here that I really love. And yeah, I mean, people seem to really like the book at the time and still do. It's a weird thing to be doing X-Men because after we left, it was completely reinvented. So like it does more than any other book. It doesn't feel like it connects to what they're doing now in a lot of ways, even though it specifically was made to connect to what they're doing now. So I have a weird relationship with it, but I'm happy to have done it. Kelly.
I mean, when we talked about it all together, I remember our hearts sort of sinking when we realized the directive was come in and be the story that's a big story that blows everything up and ruins everything before John comes in with his great big saving idea. Like, in some ways, that was sad. Like, we love characters. We don't want to blow them all up and literally disassemble them, which is what they wanted. But I do think that, you know, once we got into it, there were fun things about that. Like, you could really swing for the fences, and especially because we knew some of what Jonathan was planning. You know, we'd been in the summits with him.
I feel like we knew all of what he was planning.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, we hadn't read it, but like we knew the inside scoop of like what they were developing, and because it was such like a new direction for that, it was a chance here to like throw all the old classics at the wall, which I credit Matt a lot for coming up with a lot of that plot and character ideas, a lot of stuff he had in his head when he came into the summit. I think he brought a lot of that with him that really helped us out. He also made the suggestion, as I recall right away, that we should be doing the numerals on the front so that the 10th one could be X. And I was like, why aren't they doing that in everything? Like, every 10-part story should have that, man. It was such a simple, obvious idea that was just sitting there.
I love it.
I'm smart. Ed, what is your thoughts?
I don't know. Yeah, it's basically what you said. There's a lot of fun stuff, I think, that we probably got away with because we knew they were just going to reboot everything. And so like there was a certain amount of like, just fucking do whatever, I guess. Like, and we got to do a bit of that for better or worse. But yeah, it definitely, I think for us, what Kelly was saying, it took away a bit of the stakes on our end, like, cause we knew that nothing we did here was going to have lasting consequences. But yeah, there was a lot of fun stuff I wanted to do coming in. Some of the stuff, you know, we got to do, and some of the stuff we didn't.
Yeah, like where were we all? I know we were all on X books coming into this. Like we were, there was a bunch of people writing X stuff. I know that like Mark Guggenheim was writing Gold, right? And Dennis Hopeless was on Gene. No, that had already ended.
Bunn was on.
Cullen was on stuff. Cullen Bunn was on.
He was on X-Men Blue.
Yeah. And Tom Taylor was on Red, or Red had ended.
I think Red had already ended, but he did arc on that.
Yeah, and I was on Astonishing X-Men, and I want to say New Mutants had ended. I was on Astonishing X-Men, and I was doing Multiple Man, I guess. And what were you guys doing at the time?
Were you doing Multiple Man already?
Yeah, Multiple Man was before this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know I was on Old Man Logan at the time, and I was doing Extermination, and Extermination was going to lead into X-Force. So I think I was like partway through Extermination when we started on this, because I had to do a bunch of goaltending to sort of like keep some of the Extermination stuff safe. And I can't remember what else I was fucking writing back then.
I was doing Mr. and Mrs. X. That was my only X book. I think I saw ads when I was doing the reread for Captain Marvel, because that was January of 2019. So I was probably already working on that. Maybe not at the summit time, but by summer, I'm sure I was already working on that too. So among
were you guys like assembled for this? Were you put together for this, or did you pitch something together?
No, Yeah, they called us and put us together. I mean, I think they knew we were close, that the three of us were friends. I think my feeling was always that they wanted something that could move quick and wouldn't have a lot of tension, and they knew that we got along. So we were
there was also I don't know if anyone said this out loud, but there was very clearly in retrospect a thing where they wanted people who were involved with the new Krakoa stuff to mostly be new people. And so I think they knew that most of us who were already writing books weren't going to get to be the big voices in the Krakoa stuff. And so I think a lot of writers were sort of off the table in that. I know Matt clearly wants to disagree with me. Just hold on. Let me finish the sentence. And so, so I do think we were three names that made sense to do a big disassemble piece, especially because Matt ended up getting tapped to do part of what then came next. Matt clearly disagrees. Go ahead.
Well, Ed was on Krakoa stuff because he did New Mutants.
I said mostly.
And I was asked to do it, so I would say mostly not.
So I was out, apparently. And this was my
you were
chance
on
to write
other
X-Men, I guess.
You were on other stuff.
And I was just doing Captain Marvel, and Mr. and Mrs. X was ending. I mean, it was ending when Krakoa started. We had a hard out at 12 or 10 or something. I can't remember. Anyway, so I guess not. I didn't know you were asked. I knew you were doing the Uncanny stuff, but I didn't know.
I did the Uncanny stuff. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how, whatever. Because partway through this, they decided that, I mean, I don't know if this is telling tales out of school here, but like, I think when we started, our thought was that at the end of our run, Hawks and Pox was going to start House of X and Powers of 10, and then
that was the plan for sure.
That was the plan, and then at a certain point, they were like, "No, we need more time." Yeah, and so they called me to keep going on Uncanny, and Ed on X-Force,
and I did the Uncanny annual as well, which
but you guys are. But what happened was, because Hickman wasn't ready, that's when we ended up pitching Age of X-Men, or
right.
In the summit, a different summit. I said actually, I think Chip was the one who said Age of X-Men, because I was talking to Chip in the hall and he was like, you got to get in there. You got to elbow your way in. And so I pitched this Age of X-Men, which what they ended up doing is not what I pitched. And that's a whole thing that we will not be putting on the details of the podcast. But,
Are you sure?
Well, no, I mean, we can put it, I'm happy to say that. I'm not going to get into the weeds about my pitch not being taken, even though in theory Age of X-Men was my idea, but it wasn't even my idea. It's a rip on Age of Apocalypse, which was the whole point, right?
Well, that was your idea, correct? Age of Apocalypse? When you were a small child?
And I will say that Age of Apocalypse was the first, crossover that I experienced in real time that was big like that, the teenager, and it blew my mind. I loved it. And so Age of X-Men, I thought it was a really good idea if they needed a couple months to fill. I thought it was a great idea to do those stories, but I'm just saying, I'm just trying to make it clear that what I pitched was not what they did. They did Age of X-Men. Those were not the books I pitched. So those books all belong to different people. I'm not trying to take credit or get away from it.
At the end of the day, Zach Thompson and Lonnie Nadler came in and did that concurrently with me on Uncanny and Ed on X-Force.
And I ended up writing one of those Age of X books as well, because apparently I will not say no to anything.
You won't say no to anything that you can put Glob Herman.
Yeah, I mean,
well, that's literally
they
usually
do a really cool thing that you were excited about. Of course, you should say yes,
sure.
right?
And absolutely, and no joke, that was my first question when I came onto New Mutants and onto Age of X-Men was, could I put Glob on the team?
Was Glob your boy?
Glob's my man. I love writing Glob Herman quite a bit. So anywhere where I can stick him, I'll do it.
Ed, we've been friends for almost a decade. Somewhere
longer,
in there.
I think,
yeah, maybe longer. I don't know. I sort of, there's a couple of years where
I'm telling you, it's been longer, but
it feels longer. I know that. But I don't think, we talk about our work all the time. We talk about stuff we're making, and obviously, I think you have a special soft spot for certain projects. I think we all do, and I know that when you make Murder Book, that those feel really personal to you. I know The Violent is a book, your book and image, that feels really personal. I don't think I've ever seen you as excited as you were to put those chickens, to give Glob chickens in. That was like, you just kept talking about that and being like, yeah, he's got the chickens, and you like came up with the perfect names for the chickens, and like you were like, oh, the chickens are on the cover now. I got chickens on the cover. It was kind of amazing.
I don't know what it was about the idea of Glob having backyard chickens that really just resonated with me, but it did definitely just.
You just needed some comfort animals.
You needed something, yeah, exactly. And I was stupidly excited about this. Chickens still kind of am. Like, I don't, I haven't read an X book. I don't know if you guys are the same as me, but like when I stopped writing for like a any book or any sort of umbrella of books, I just stopped reading them afterwards.
It's hard.
Like it's like, it's like breaking up with someone and you don't want to like hang out with their boyfriend afterwards, and so I haven't read, so I don't know if they've kept the chickens, but I just pray that they have. I'm afraid to check in.
I read the new stuff. I'm behind on everything, but I don't do that. I know that a lot of people do. I just keep reading books. I don't know why.
You're a better person than I am.
Maybe I'm not as emotionally invested in the books I make. I don't know.
I recently caught up a little bit with a few series because I was using some X-Men, or I am using some X-Men and Captain Marvel. So, but I do tend to be more like Ed. I stop reading something when I'm off it. It's just too hard. Like, you're either frustrated by what they're doing or jealous of what they're like. There's rarely like a middle ground where you're like, oh, they're doing the perfect thing. Like, you're just too attached to it. I am to disconnect that way and enjoy it. Although I did read Hellions regardless. Although there had been some distance before I read Hellions, so there had been time to heal.
Hellions by future, or maybe depending on when we put this out, previous podcast guest Zeb Wells.
Right. Yeah, I think Zeb's a hilarious human being and a hilarious writer, and Hellions was just like right in the sweet spot for me for what he was doing.
I also think Zeb is a human being.
Ethan and
funny.
I thought it was pretty good, Matt.
I liked it.
Yeah, thank you, guys. But you guys are paid to like it, so it's not really.
Yeah.
Hellions or something else?
My joke.
The joke.
joke.
Zeb Wells is a human being.
I do like the idea that Zeb pays people to like Hellions. That's a better joke, Kelly. Good job. You got him.
Ethan and I are aspiring writers, and so I wanted to ask about.
Just to interrupt, sorry, but you guys are actually writing a comic. You're not aspiring writers. You're
That's
writers.
true. We are writers. It's happening right now.
Stop underselling us, Griffin.
Fuck! It doesn't feel real. So this book, at least from what I can see on these dates, came out weekly. Yes,
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is insane. And that's I imagine part of the reason that there's 3 of you writing the book. So a weekly title already kind of nuts. 3 of you guys. How does the work sort of get split up? How did it all come to fruition? And is the
because I'm literally interested in the
aspect
script
of it-
handoff. Like how does that work at that?
We did a very specific thing that almost nobody does, I think, right?
Really?
Yeah, and as probably nobody does it because I think it was bad.
I don't know if it was bad. It worked.
Well, is there a standard procedure for how this
I don't
sort
think
of thing
so,
works?
but I can.
Okay.
What we did, I'm just jumping in. But what we did after we had the whole thing mapped out for each individual issue, it was the job of one person to outline the issue based on like the outline we already had. So they would outline 20 pages, right? These are 20 pages.
Yeah, except for the first one, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the person who outlined would have to write 6 pages. The other 2 would have to write 7 pages.
Yeah.
And we would just pick our scenes and sort of divide it up that way. Usually like in 6-7 page chunks.
Yeah, almost always, unless there was something specific someone wanted. Like I remember there was a scene where Ed really wanted to write the kids and I really wanted to write this Laura scene, but they were too short. And so we like chopped it up a little more in that one. But usually it was minimum 6 page chunk for the most part.
Wow.
But I disagree with Matthew. I don't think many people could pull it off, but as the person who reread it, other than Ethan and Griffin reading it, even as a writer, I had trouble telling
Who wrote what? Yeah.
who wrote what. And I think that's a real testament to us, either sharing similar voices, probably a combination of having a little bit of similar styles, plus working towards making sure that it was pretty smooth. I think it reads pretty smooth, I have to say. There's a lot less disconnect between issue to issue. Like, I've recently been reading some things that had multiple writers involved, and man, there can be some real harsh, like gaps and problems, and this cliffhanger doesn't match. And I think that is almost missing from us because we were all involved.
I wish that I could find it, and I wish I could remember, but I know there was a joke in there when I was rereading that I specifically went, I bet that was Kelly.
I want to know what that joke was now.
Yeah, I want to know what that joke was.
Maybe I can search for it. Hang on.
I had to tell, I'm writing right now DC versus Vampires at DC, and there's a spinoff that I co-write. I co-write DC versus Vampires with James Tynan, and then there's a spinoff that I co-write with Alex Packnadell. And Alex was like very new to it, and I was like, and he was like, yeah, I don't know, like how things work. And I was like, well, I can tell you how it works in dealing with the fans. Everything that you do that you're proud of, I will get credit for, and everything that I do that you hate, you will get blamed for. And I was like, that's like some sort of immutable internet law. I don't know how it works. And Alex like hit me back like after the first issue came out, and he's like, wow, they're really like perfect at like giving you credit for my jokes and blaming me for things that you made me do. And I was like, yeah, it's really remarkable. And I don't, it's metaphysical in some way, but that's always my feeling on collaboration. So
I feel like we kept pretty quiet about who was writing what when we were doing it, because I think we were pretty focused on making sure it felt uniform. Everything felt like it could come from one voice, because like Kelly said before, you can get some just intense whiplash when you go from one writer to another, and it really can kick you out of the experience. If I'm not mistaken, we would wait, right? Sometimes we would wait for one person to turn in their pages to connect them a little bit.
I don't remember it as being like definitely waiting, but I do think it was pretty coordinated. And when we could, we were waiting and or revising after pages turned in. I'm telling you, rereading it, that aspect of it for multiple writers and multiple artists involved, it's pretty damn smooth.
When I said I don't think people should do it this way or whatever I said that was negative, I don't necessarily mean from a fan standpoint, from a reader standpoint. I think from a creative standpoint, it created more stress for us than we needed.
Well, I definitely wouldn't recommend it for people who don't know each other as well as we do. Maybe I'm blue skying it after the fact, but you know me, I'm always more interested in the final product than having a good time anyway, unfortunately.
Sure. It seemed to be, from what I remember, a fairly pleasant, fairly like easy process. Like it wasn't a real intense thing, batting it back and forth like that. I think there was a few times where we had disagreements over a direction and stuff, but overall, the way we set it up, it felt like really efficient in terms of how to get this done.
To me too, I really trusted them both. I think, I believe I was the last one brought on. Like Matt and Ed were already in, and when I got, or maybe everyone was asked at the same time, and we were all considering. I don't know, but they were like, Marvel was like, so this would be a co-write with Matt and Ed. And I was like, oh my God, like some naive little baby. I was like, oh, I love them. They're my favorite. And then after I hung up, I was like, oh God, what if this ruins it? Like, these are two of my favorite people in comics. What if we have a terrible time? And that, I mean, I do care a lot about the work, but I'm very glad that didn't happen. To me, I'm not trying to pretend it was always easy, but we definitely came out of it better friends than we went in, and way closer. So I'm grateful to it for that, if nothing else,
Yeah, I think the funny thing, like when you talked about when you guys asked about it being weekly, like in my time at Marvel does a thing that I think goes above editorial's head, and I think has more to do with accounting and count titles and whatever tax reasons. But there's always in December a weekly book, a weekly event, a weekly something. And in my time at Marvel, I did 4 of them. I did them every year, basically. Phoenix Resurrection was me writing 5 issues in 5 weeks. The Marvel Knights that me and Donnie did and brought in Teeny Howard and Vida Ayala, and Annihilation Scourge. So I've done these 4 times. For some reason that I got the reputation as the guy who can do this, which is funny because it's flattering, but also it's the most stressful thing you can do in comics is do a weekly book. And I think it doesn't always I don't know. I don't want to take the shine off the diamond at all too much. And for people who love the book, like, we really appreciate that. But I do feel like, you have to acknowledge that comics is always sort of an assembly line. Like, the machine doesn't stop. It's always going and
Relentless.
It's relentless. And a weekly version is like that, but the machine is running 10 times as fast as it's literally running 4 times. It's running literally 4 times as fast as it normally does. And I don't think that's necessarily conducive to the best work. So when you ask us, like, how do we feel about it, and it had this crazy schedule, this more than almost anything else I'd ever done, I could sit there and say, if you'd given us 10 months to make this book instead of 10 weeks, I mean, obviously we didn't have 10 weeks, but like, if it was over a 10-month schedule instead of a 10-week schedule, I feel very confident that we would have made a better book.
Well, and maybe it would have had consistent art, which is not to swing on any of the artists who were all quite great, but, it's still a bit of a whiplash week to week. I think that's one of the reasons we were interested in writing all the issues together instead of breaking it up. I've never had to do that before, so I have a very different feeling for it, I think, than Matt.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think that was my first co-writing experience on that book. I don't think I co-wrote. I've co-written since, and typically I'm not a fan of the experience, which is not a knock against anyone I've co-written with or the final product. It's just I think that it tends to be, you get like a
hybrid.
Yeah, you don't get the best of any one writer. You don't get the lowest of any one writer. You get that middle ground, and that can be frustrating to deal with. But
the funny thing is, I had the conversation recently because I co-written a bunch of stuff with James Tynion at DC. I co-wrote with Mariko Tamaki at DC. I co-wrote with Nick Spencer at Marvel. I co-wrote with Donnie Cates. I've co-written with a lot of people. And I always find myself at a certain point telling editors, well, it's not faster. And they're like, how could it not be? And I'm like,
yeah, 100%.
Because I make decisions and make, snap judgment calls at 3 a.m. and decide things, but I can't do that. And it's funny because I think across the board editorial is always like, well, it's, you're doing half the work. And it's like, no, I think
that's the solution. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's not. And I'm like, it's fine if you want certain things, and I think there's a way we could have maybe done this that would be faster if we were just like, I'm taking this issue, let's meet up again in a week or whatever. But it would be such a chaotic book, and just
punting the problem to later, right? The time you have to spend.
And so I think I know that they did those Avengers, what was the Avengers Weekly that we were
No Surrender, was it called?
No Surrender.
Right.
Those I know were handled different, and I called all those guys and we're like, how are you doing? Because it was like Mark Waid and Jim Zub and Al Ewing, and if there's someone else I'm forgetting, I think there is someone else that I'm forgetting, but maybe not.
Really great
Charles, what was Charles involved with? Because he was involved in something, and he popped into our.
Charles was doing Wolverine stuff.
Wasn't that Hunt for Wolverine stuff?
Yeah, right. That's what it was. Okay,
it was Hunt for Wolverine. Yeah, Charles was doing Hunt for Wolverine. And that's why he came back in to tell us where that was. And Jerry was doing that Infinity thing that explained. I mean, that was we could talk. We could
have the Space Stone, right?
We can talk about that because that was. I mean, again, this is maybe telling tales out of school, but that's one of my favorite editorial, one of my favorite moments at Marvel of oh, we have a problem because we have to make things so fast and like let's just get everyone to figure it out, was they brought Wolverine back in something. Like he comes back in, I don't know.
Yeah,
Marvel.
in the Jason Aaron Infinity Stone thing where he just shows up and he's got one of the Infinity Stones.
Yeah, he's got one of the Infinity Stones and
Stone.
The what? Which one?
I'm pretty sure it's a space stone.
Yeah. Okay. That's a purple one.
It's blue. It's blue.
Right.
Yeah,
I was writing Old Man Logan at the time, and I remember reading that issue when it came out, being like, "Oh, cool. Wish I'd known about this."
Yeah, but there was this. I just remember there being this moment, and us being like, "Well, how did he come back?" And they're like, "Well, he has this stone," and there was just this moment of being like, "Oh, this wasn't." Like this was a cool moment that they wanted to put in an issue, and then it was like, how did he have the stone? Like, there was sort of just this assumption that like he'd always had it, and everyone's like, that doesn't make sense. And then there was a time travel. There was at some point a time travel thing where they were like, he's going back in time to go to Kitty Pryde's wedding because he loves Kitty, and that's like his little sister. And I remember being in the summit and just raising my hand and being like, he's going back from the future to Kitty's wedding, and they were like, yeah. And I was like, why would he go back in time to watch his friend not get married?
I don't remember that comment, but I sure wish I did. That's amazing.
That's pretty good.
But I agree, like that. This whole weekly, several writers on a book, it just doesn't. It's so much more work, so much more coordination, so much more of everything. But you would think, even from an editorial standpoint, you got to manage 3 egos instead of one, right? You got to like, you're there to put out fires when they, inevitably start fighting. Because that's, you're going to have, 3 strong-minded people, creative people working together. They're going to have disagreements, and they're going to dig their heels in. And as the editor, you're going to be the one who's going to have to deal with it. I
don't really know why anyone wants it, to be honest. I mean, yes, it's solve a problem in certain scenarios, like for us on this, and it worked. But like, I see fans wanting it all the time, like, oh, Kelly, you should write with Tom Taylor. And I'm like, why should Tom and I write on a book together? We have such similar voices anyway. Like, I don't even know what you're gaining from that. And then it's not like we're going to be able to do 2 times the amount of work, because it will just take both of us more time. But publishers do really go to this hoop, like with the pandemic, and I had some illness and stuff, and I was really falling behind on my deadlines. And, Marvel wants to have this conversation with me. They're like, listen, we can get a guest writer in, someone to help you co-write. And I'm like, that is not going to speed things up at all. All you're talking about is I need to put all the stuff that's in my head on a piece of paper, and that's what I'm trying to do anyway. Like this adding a person to this isn't going to speed it up.
I mean, we can vouch. Griffin and I co-write everything, and it's terrible. We're always like, why did we do this?
I think there's a difference, though, and I also do like that if anybody is on the fence about picking up Uncanny X-Men that we wrote together, we're absolutely not convincing anyone to pick it up. But yeah, I think there's a difference between people who are used to co-writing that work together versus people who are used to just toiling away in their offices or kitchen tables by themselves, being thrust into sort of a situation where they have to suddenly work with 2 other people.
I also think that creator-owned is a little bit different. Not that there aren't some really famous writing teams that have done it really well in corporate comics too, but I just feel like in creator-owned, I don't know, you're not following someone else's directive that you're both locked into. It's more of a collaborative sort of, instead of Matt, Ed, and I fighting over who gets to write so-and-so this week for the plot we've been inherited, you guys are just sort of making that up as you go.
Yeah.
But
how often do you 2 get in fights about it?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I would say I think we're like 70-30. 70% of the time we are like on the exact same page, and there's those moments of like, oh my god, we share a brain. And then I'd say maybe like 30% of the time we'll have to go back and forth on something, and 10% is like full like I completely disagree.
We gotta walk away from this. Yeah, but
like, do you guys take a week off from each other? Like you gotta take some time.
Well,
and, like,
we can't do that. We work like every day together, so it's like we just gotta not talk about this book for a few days. But like, I will say like the stuff where we are like smashing heads together tends to be where a lot of like the bigger like twists come from, like the bigger like changes that we're really excited about. So I don't know, it's all pretty productive, I think.
It's basically like a fuck your idea. Fuck your idea. Do you have another idea? No.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess we're figuring it out. And then
It's going to turn out great, but I will say there's a ton of resentment building. Like I don't know how long this can last.
I will say, as the person again who just reread it this morning, in addition to Ed saying we're not encouraging anyone, I will say I really enjoyed especially the first 4 issues. I think the first 4 issues are really strong. I think we go off the rails a little bit in 5, and we can talk about why or not. But
I think we seeded some fun mystery stuff. There's, I think that each of us had like itches that we wanted to scratch coming in. Like I really wanted to do Glob and the team surrounding him. I think Kelly, you and I were kind of like butting heads over who got to do Armor more often.
Yeah, I love Armor, and so I was very interested in her. But Ed was both interested in her and more interested in the kids as a group. And so I think I usually ended up ceding that ground to Ed usually because I just more wanted Armor in with the main guys, like not with it, because I feel like she's a little different than those kids, even though she does sort of belong there. So that was a little bit of a push and pull. The thing I was going to say before is that one of the things that I felt good about in rereading it today was that I do feel like one of the advantages, and you guys could maybe speak to this, or maybe you're so similar it doesn't work this way, but I was feeling like it's nice to have other people's ideas in there, because it's thematically, like even when I'm trying to explore and try new things and do new things, I still thematically have the things that are most important to me that are sort of things that I always go back to. And I don't even think that's a bad thing. It's the ideas you're interested in, the things you want to explore, but you can push into new, interesting ground when you've got other writers who you respect and like, who are into other things too. And like, I think Matt and Ed brought a lot of their DNA to Uncanny. And so it's never a story I would have told on my own. And I like that about it,
Yeah, I remember specifically you, Kelly, very much being like, this has to be about the younger X-Men being taken seriously. And like, she was like, you, Kelly, were like, this is not something that the books don't take them seriously. The like, no one takes them. The X-Men in the books don't take them seriously. This is our chance to really be like, these are X-Men, like show them respect. And that was not a place that I thought I would go. And I like those young X-Men. And I thought that was such a good point to be
was
like,
that me or was that Ed?
I thought it was you.
Was it me?
I was really pushing, like, not to disagree with you, Matt, but also to disagree with you. Yeah. So when we
maybe I'm misremembering.
When we all came in, I think we all had different ideas. Because remember, Matt, you came in and you were just like multiple man, like just over and over. You had like wanted multiple man in there. I had just been talking to another editor about doing a young X-Men book, and I wanted to do like this young sort of version of New Mutants. And the thing, and I think this is where Kelly and I probably really agreed, and where we saw Armor is, I always saw Armor as someone who's paid enough dues that she should be in a leadership position and not, and I think that was one of the things we talked about earlier was sort of putting her on those tracks to become more of a leader by the time it was over. And I'm trying to, like, Kelly, I know you had my favorite thing that you had was all the Avengers Infinity War stuff. Because Matt and I had seen it the night before and Kelly hadn't seen it.
Yeah, we went to the premiere. Like,
that was great.
Kelly wasn't in town yet for the summit, and Ed was in town, so we went to the premiere of the movie in New York. And then
was that movie 4 years ago?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And and Kelly in the room. Kelly beforehand was like, everyone had seen it, and everyone at the summit had seen it because like all the Marvel people went, and Kelly was the only person who missed it.
That summit was the small summit.
Yeah. I mean, it was just editors.
It was just, but yes, everyone but me had fucking seen this movie.
And you specifically were like, don't spoil it for me. And then you kept pitching things that were in the movie, and we didn't want to tell you like that's in the fucking Avengers movie.
Well,
but, like,
everyone's shaking their head.
we just kept being like, let's not do that. And you'd be like, that's a cool idea. Why wouldn't we do that? And we'd be like, let's just do something else. And we didn't know how to tell you, like, that's the plot of the movie.
We had to break. I was like, why?
Yeah.
I'm like, listen, that's in the movie. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I've been a millionaire then. Clearly my ideas are above this room.
Yeah. I would argue that the movies are below the comics.
Whoa.
Team
That's
Comics.
Matt's hot take here.
Yeah.
on Ideas
Weirdly,
Don't
I
Bleed.
also have a Marvel movie podcast where I argue the exact opposite. No, I mean, let's talk about the summit for a little bit. Like, if we're going to talk about the book, like, let's talk about the creation. I think that's the kind of thing that maybe people find interesting, or maybe
can
they
I
don't.
give Matt some credit because Multiple Man totally was his thing.
I love that guy.
I love him too. One of my fave characters, and so criminally underused with such a great flexible power set that I get it. It's hard to use it. You got to be really smart, but it's incredible. But I have to say on the reread, the Multiple Man stuff is still fucking great.
I love the way he kicks it off. Yeah.
How he kicks it off, and the mystery with Kitty and Kitty disappearing, and I'm telling you, the first 4 issues are tight. How that stuff comes together. Why does Multiple Man have different powers, which he shouldn't have, and then the resolution of that. I think the resolution, to be honest, is a little buried. Like, it's sort of a blink and you miss it. Like, and those are some of the construction issues that I think sometimes come with a big event like this. Like, sometimes these things that you're building don't quite deliver all the way like you hope they will. I mean, I would say one of my favorite things that we did is the Kitty stuff, but we don't really pay it off well enough. In my opinion, I think there's a part in issue with either 5 or 6 when we're getting into like the idea of the council, and I don't know if we were getting pushback from Marvel or if we just
we were
in agreement on what it should be, but it gets a little messy in there, and you can tell it's not what it was like originally supposed to be. You can feel it, you know.
We did get pushback on the council because they were like, that's where John ends up going, like with the idea of Apocalypse on the council and like all these different mutant factions having an equal voice. They were like, that's a Krakoan thing. Like, let's just push that back.
And it's too bad because I'm telling you, in those first 4 issues, the setup and the mystery feels like the strongest part of it to me. Like, that we really seeded that correctly. And even with it feeling chaotic, you still feel like you're uncovering a mystery, as opposed to the back half, where it just feels like war, X-Men, chaos stuff, big fights, people throwing powers at each other. It just gets really dumbed down. And listen, you sort of have to go there a little bit. And how much you're successful and how much you're not is, you know, salt to taste, I suppose. But I think the ideas are all there, but like some of the execution, you know, and that happens on any comic, even when it's just you and your perfect team. Like, it's hard work to create something and make it just how you envision it. But I do think the more cooks you throw in there, the more complex it becomes, for sure.
Yeah. And I think a book like this, like, is trying to feed so many different masters of like, we're putting an end to a thing. We're also trying to like satisfy this certain thing, but also, you know, we're clearing, you know, it's hard to do the fan favorite X-Men when they're like, get a lot of the X-Men off the table. You're like, well, that's complicated.
I can't, was it a mandate that we did the Age of Apocalypse stuff in this? I feel like that was.
Yes. Yeah. They wanted Age of Apocalypse stuff.
Right. Okay. And I think I know everyone loves Age of Apocalypse, but that was sort of the era where I tapped out of comics for a little while. I
can't remember. Did it become a mandate because they were doing Age of X-Men, and so?
No, it was the anniversary, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it was an anniversary, and they're like, we want to have nods to this.
Because I do think that was one of the biggest mistakes of the run in retrospect. There just wasn't enough time. Like, all the world building and design for that Age of Apocalypse world that's like inside Legion's head, it just doesn't feel fully fleshed out. And I think it's just a matter of like time and attention. Like, it just doesn't quite work like some of the other stuff, and it feels like spread a little thin, you know. But it's a cool idea. Like, and what I keep coming back to is when we were in that room, that they were very excited when Matt would say something like, well, what about Legion? Because they knew that Krakoa was going in such a different direction. And we knew it too, but they probably knew the nitty-gritty better than we did, that, you know, they wanted us to bring in all these old crazy conceits and everything, like pile it all on. And, you know, that part of it was fun, but it can get out of hand pretty easily.
Yeah, when you guys stepped off the book and it was just me for the second half, like I had a meeting and I came into the office and I remember very clearly they were like, this is the farewell to this era. And I was like, okay, and what does that mean? And they're funny because they made us tape. I don't know if you guys taped them, but we taped videos about different eras where we were like, this era of X-Men and how they defined the eras. I was like, that's not how I would define the eras of X-Men, but whatever. And they were like, this era starts at Grant Morrison and ends at you. And I was like,
oh, no pressure.
And like, I was like, it starts with Grant Morrison. And they were like, yeah. And I was like, so this era of X-Men starts with 8 million mutants being killed. Like it starts with Genosha being destroyed basically. And they were like, yeah, I guess. And they were like, you know, part of my mandate was go in and decimate that, just completely annihilate the X-Men, make this the darkest moment in X-Men history. And I was like, okay. And then they said, you know, make it the darkest moment in X-Men history and touch on every era. And I was like,
no problem.
Okay. And I was like, okay. But I realized that when I started doing that I was like, oh, this is coming from the fact that we touched on a few eras and that really got them excited, that we did Age of Apocalypse stuff and we did Young X-Men stuff. And they were like, built on that. They got excited about that idea that we had in the book of like, yeah, there's some flashback stuff, but also it's about the next generation. And they were like, flashback to everything. And I was like, okay. And so that's why my run after this like has even more of that stuff.
Interesting.
And there's like Age of Apocalypse stuff in there because I shoot out Cyclops' eye and he grows his hair a little bit. And like there's other Age of Apocalypse like little nods in there, but I'm just literally was reading everything and just being like, okay, I'm gonna reference that and pull that. And I feel like when we did it in our 10 issues, it was very much like slapped on in a way where we didn't understand what was being asked of us in some ways. That it was like really do an Age of Apocalypse tribute, and we did it, but then I think you're right that it's like a little more surface. Like Age of Apocalypse is owed a greater debt than just being what we did for it. Maybe, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't blame us. I just think, you know, something seems like it will work on paper. And it's not that it didn't work. It hangs together fine as a story. It's just, you look at it and you go, maybe the first 4 issues feel pretty tight and like they're very controlled. And then it's at issue 5 where it feels like it becomes a little unwieldy to me.
And that brings us to the end of part 1 of our retrospective on Uncanny X-Men with Kelly Thompson and Ed Brisson. While you're waiting on part 2, make sure you head over to 1979semifinalist.substack.com to see everything that Kelly Thompson and her wonderful collaborators are working on, and edbrisson.substack.com for everything that Ed and his collaborators had to offer. To get the latest episodes of this podcast, as well as news, giveaways, and even comics delivered straight to your inbox, go to ashcanpress.com and sign up for the newsletter. We'll be back next week for part 2 of our X-Men discussion, and in the meantime you can write to us at ideasdon'tbleedpod@gmail.com or tweet to Matt at ashcanpress on Twitter, me at Tales to Astonish, or Griffin at Griff Sheridan. We'll include some of your correspondence on the show, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. And big thanks to Summer People for our theme song, Where's the Poison? Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Where is the poison?